Welcome to the channel. I'm Jenny, and I just completed 1 year on the carnivore diet, and today we're going to take a look at my blood work over the past year. I started testing my blood in month 6, and I've tested every month since for a total of 7 sets of blood work. This video is split up into 5 sections: cholesterol, blood sugar, inflammation, vitamins and minerals, and miscellaneous. I will first lay out the blood work from my most recent blood draw at the 1 year mark, and then I'll go over some ranges that I've seen over the past 7 tests. Then I'll go into a brief discussion on the numbers before moving on to the next section. Everything is laid out meticulously with chapters, so if you don't want to watch the discussion portions, you definitely don't have to. But I recommend that you stick around for the discussions because there's some really interesting numbers here and some emerging research I'm going to talk about, and I know I learned something, and maybe you will too. Also, a disclaimer that I am not a medical professional and nothing I talk about here should be taken as personal medical advice. I've learned all of this from reading books and journal articles and watching a ton of videos. And I've listed all of my references in the description below. First, though, let's talk about where I ordered all of this blood work, how much it cost, and where you can order some of these tests for yourself. I've ordered from 2 websites. The first is ownyourlabs.com and the second is Ulta Lab Tests. Own Your Labs uses Labcorp for their blood draws, and Ulta uses Quest Diagnostics. Ordering the blood work is super simple. You just order it on the website, pay for it directly, and then within about a day, they will email you a copy of the order. You'll print that out and you'll take it with you to get the blood drawn. I'm most of the time using Own Your Labs, so they use Labcorp. I like to make an appointment beforehand online with Labcorp because it just goes so much faster. You can also do a walk-in. You have to bring in that printout. That's how they know that you already paid for it, and they know what tests they need to order. So bring that with you, get the blood drawn, easy peasy lemon squeezy. I usually get my results back within like 2 to 8 days. The 8 days was right around the holidays, so that's not normal. Normally it's 2 or 3 days. And you have to set up an account with Labcorp in order to get your results. So make sure that when you're purchasing the blood work on ownyourlabs.com, you put your first and last name and birth date and make sure that's going to match with what you set up with your Labcorp account, because otherwise it's going to mess everything up and you're going to have a hard time getting your results. The costs are reasonable, I think. A standard lipid panel is like $8 or $9, an A1C $8 or $9. There are some more expensive tests, but all the ones that you would want to be getting most of the time are pretty inexpensive. The reason I prefer to do this self-pay, number one, I'm getting blood work done like once a month because I'm sharing the results with you guys, but also the first time I wanted to get my blood work done, I went to my doctor first, and it was like pulling teeth trying to get her to order blood work for me. She would not order me an A1C because my fasting glucose was, not high. And I'm like, who cares? I'd like to have the number, and she would not order it for me. So I just stopped going through my doctor for all of this blood work, and I just ordered it online. There are 4 or 5 states where you're not allowed to order blood work online, so you will find out very quickly if you live in one of those states because you won't be able to order any of the tests. Total cost of all this blood work over the past 7 months has been about $1,500. So I'd like to thank all of our channel members for your support in the testing and data gathering that I do. I'd also like to thank today's sponsor, Element Electrolytes. It has everything you need and nothing you don't, with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. I personally use the raw unflavored Element, but they have 8 delicious flavors to choose from. I recommend using electrolytes when you first start carnivore to help combat keto flu or carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms. Or for me, I've really upped my workout sessions in month 13 of the carnivore diet, and Element is helping me to stay hydrated during those workouts. Right now, Element is offering my viewers a free sample pack with any order. That's 8 single-serving packets free with any Element order. If you're doing carnivore, I recommend getting a box of the raw, unflavored Element with my link, and then you will get that sample pack and you can try out all their flavors before you commit to a full box. If I was to use one of the flavored Element, I absolutely love watermelon and mango chili. Head over to drinkelement.com/Jenny Middich. That's DRINKLMNT.com/Jenny Middich to get your free sample pack with any order today. Let's move into cholesterol with my standard lipid panel. My most recent numbers: LDL cholesterol 243, HDL-C 74, triglycerides 67, and total cholesterol 326. As far as the ranges I've seen over the past 7 months, for my LDL cholesterol, I've seen anywhere from 136 to 243. It's typically between 150 and 175. My HDL cholesterol is between 64 and 79. Most of the time, it's in the low to mid 70s. My triglycerides have been between 46 to 67. Typically, they're in the low 50s. And my total cholesterol is usually between 218 and 326, but usually is between like 246 to 262. Now let's move into the lipid particle size test. This is a test that measures the size and buoyancy of your LDL particles, and we'll talk about why that's important here in the discussion section. My most recent numbers, my LDL particle number was 2,292, small LDL 177, LDL size 22.1, and I had the A pattern. As far as my range over the past 7 months, my LDL particle number has been anywhere between 1280 and 2292, but it's typically in the 1800s. My small LDL particles have been anywhere between 123 to 297. My LDL size 21.7 to 22.1, and I've always had the A pattern. Before we talk about my specific numbers, let's quickly go over what values I'm looking for within the cholesterol numbers. I see them as a window into the state of my metabolic health, nothing more. Most of these reference ranges I've found from doctors within the low-carb community, and I've listed out my references in the description below under the heading Bloodwork References. In the standard lipid panel, the first thing I look at is triglycerides. I want them to be under 80. Typical guidance is below 150, but there's some newer research coming out that says that should be below 100. I personally like to stay below 80. Next, I look at my HDL cholesterol, and I'm looking for a number above 50 as a female. For men, that would be above 40. With the lipid particle size test, I'm looking for an A pattern, a large LDL particle size, a small number of the small dense LDL particles, and then the particle number itself, LDLP, that's going to vary on a few different things, and we'll talk about those things here in a minute. So let's say I looked at the standard and advanced lipid panel and I had a B pattern, I had a large number of small dense LDL particles, my trigs were above 150 and my HDL was below 40. What would that tell me? Well, basically that would tell me that something is off with my body. There's something going on metabolically with my system. It could be high blood sugar, high blood pressure, eating a bunch of ultra-processed foods, metabolic syndrome, smoking. It could be a lot of things. But why is it so important to have low triglycerides, high HDL, and have healthy particles? Well, your particles have a job to do, and if they're damaged, they can't do their job. It's as simple as that. You don't necessarily have to do the advanced lipid particle size test if you don't want to. If you have low triglycerides and high HDL, you will almost 100% have an A pattern and large buoyant LDL particles because all of those things go together. But I do think it's fun to do this test at least one time so you can see all of the numbers for yourself. If you'd like a more in-depth discussion on cholesterol, head over to my 6-month carnivore blood work video. The first half of that video is a cholesterol 101 and it goes into a lot of detail. Let's move into my most recent numbers. My most recent LDL cholesterol of 243 and total of 326. Those are the highest I've ever seen those numbers on Carnivore, and I have a few hunches as to why. First off, I had fasted for 18 hours before that blood test. Typically, I'm fasting for 12 to 14 hours, and the longer that you fast, the more LDL particles you're going to see. That's just the life cycle of that particular particle. In general, I'd been doing 16 to 18 hour fasts on a daily basis the entire month of December. I had been doing very regimented meal timing with breakfast around 9 a.m. and dinner ending by 4 p.m. I had started intense strength training at the end of November 4 times a week, and along with that, I've been doing some hormesis in the form of cold plunges and the steam room. I added all of that onto my walking regimen, which is 5 to 6 days a week, 2 to 4 miles per day. I ate a very strict carnivore diet for the month of December. No cheat meals, no vegetables, no nothing like that. Just very, very strict. And I had been losing weight steadily in December. I lost 6 pounds that month. As I'm becoming leaner, as my BMI is decreasing, I'm seeing increases in my LDL cholesterol when I'm on a carnivore diet. I believe that I am a lean mass hyperresponder. This is a person who sees their LDL cholesterol number skyrocket on carnivore, keto, but also they have very low triglycerides and high HDL cholesterol. I've been doing very intense workouts with a very, very, very low carb diet, basically 0 carbs most days. Plus, I've been doing a lot of fasting, so it follows that a lot of my energy is coming from my fat stores, my adipose tissue. Your body can create its own glucose from the protein that you consume, but there's really not that much of it around. And if you're really working out a ton plus fasting, plus not eating carbs, energy has to come from somewhere. A proposed theory for this is called the Lipid energy model, and it is just a theory, but it's very interesting. It makes a lot of sense. So let me give you the Cliff Notes version of it real quick. Basically, one of the reasons your LDL cholesterol can go up on a low-carb diet is because your body needs fuel. Think of LDL particles as delivery trucks, and they're delivering fuel to your cells in the form of triglycerides. In the absence of glucose or carbohydrates, your cells require the fuel that these LDL particles are delivering. If I was eating carbohydrates, my LDL particles would reduce because they just wouldn't be needed, because I'd be getting most of my fuel needs covered by the glucose within the carbohydrates. And I've seen this in action with my strict versus dirty carnivore experiment. I did 1 month of really strict carnivore and then got my blood tested. Then I did a month of really loosey-goosey carnivore with a few keto days thrown in. I got my blood tested again, and the numbers were really puzzling until I sat down and really looked at them. And then I realized what happened. I realized I had inadvertently done a Feldman protocol. This is when you eat very high fat and high calorie for 3 days before a standard lipid panel. And about 85% of people that try this will see the following things happen to their numbers. This is called the broken ladder. You see reductions in your total cholesterol, LDL particles, small dense LDL particles, and triglycerides, and you see a rise in HDL. So here are my numbers after that month of dirty carnivore, and you can see it follows the broken ladder exactly. What I learned from this experiment was that I can raise and lower my LDL cholesterol numbers drastically and very quickly. It is not a static number, very dynamic and always moving. By adding carbs back into my diet that last weekend, I had some vegetables and a couple of high-carb dessert items. So by adding those carbs back into my diet, my LDL particles dropped to the lowest I've ever seen them on carnivore, 1280. My LDL-P delivery trucks were no longer needed in the same volume that they were before, because I was being fueled with glucose at that point. So the delivery trucks parked themselves back in their garage or my liver, and they didn't need to go back out on the road. Now let's take a look at my next test after I'd gone back to strict carnivore. My LDL cholesterol had gone back up to 204, total 281, triglycerides 56, and my HDL 69. I was back on strict carnivore. I wasn't giving my body any quick hits of glucose for fuel. So my LDL particles ramped back up, got back on the road, and started doing their job of delivering triglycerides to my cells. And then that brings me to my most recent test, where my LDL cholesterol was a 243, total 326, triglycerides 67, HDL 74, and my LDL particle number 2,292, the highest I've ever seen it. At this point, my LDL particles were working overtime because I had incorporated hardcore strength training. And because I was fasting for 16 to 18 hours a day, the delivery trucks had to work extra hard to make sure my cells were getting the fuel that they needed. That's a very basic overview of the lipid energy model. It's much more complicated than that, but it makes a lot of sense. Again, it's just a theory, but it is being studied as we speak. I want to talk about a couple of these studies quickly, and then we'll move on to my blood sugar numbers. First off, I want to talk about the lean mass hyperresponder study that is in process. It's a prospective study focusing on lean mass hyperresponders. We talked about how those are people that have very high LDL cholesterol, high HDL cholesterol, and low triglycerides when they are on a ketogenic diet. They're doing scans of their heart arteries to check for plaque buildup, and their average subject is in their 50s, very lean, very healthy, and has been on a ketogenic diet for an average of 4 years. These 80 subjects have been matched for comparison to another set of 80 subjects in a study called Miami Heart. The Miami Heart subjects are eating a normal diet. Main difference between these two groups is their LDL cholesterol number. Baseline data was released on December 8th, showing that the plaque burden between the two groups is pretty much equal. The ketogenic group is actually a little bit better. But that study is ongoing, so they're going to be doing another set of scans on both groups of individuals in about a year to see if there's any plaque buildup. Next, there's a high-quality meta-analysis that was just released, the title of which is Increased LDL Cholesterol on a Low-Carbohydrate Diet in Adults with Normal but Not High Body Weight. It was just published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, looking at 41 randomized controlled studies where at least one of the things that was tested was a low-carb diet. What the meta-analysis found was that BMI had a greater impact on LDL cholesterol numbers than saturated fat intake. People with normal, overweight, or morbidly obese BMIs tended to see their LDL cholesterol numbers stay the same or go down when they ate a low-carb diet, while people with lean BMIs tended to see their LDL cholesterol numbers go up when they were eating a low-carb diet. All of this is very promising because while we have all this anecdotal data in people, we see people losing a ton of weight, going into remission from type 2 diabetes, improving inflammation, and a plethora of other benefits you can see when you're doing keto. It's still really important to do these studies, to be published in the journals, to be peer-reviewed, because that's how you get the ball rolling in the right direction as far as getting keto fully accepted by the medical community and to stop all of this demonization of the diet. I've linked the studies that I just talked about in the description below, along with some fun videos from Dave Feldman and Nick Norwitz. You could binge those channels. They are amazing. Sorry this section was so long, but people get really worked up about LDL cholesterol, and in my opinion, LDL cholesterol is not the best biomarker for metabolic health. It's been demonized for the past 60 years, not on the basis of good science, but on a bunch of other motives, including pride, profit, and religion. Now, if you have not heard the background story on this whole thing, I have 2 books that you absolutely need to read. The first book is called The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz. She's a former vegetarian, investigative journalist. She spent 10 years researching this book, dove really deep into all of the, reasons as to why saturated fat has been demonized for the past 60 years. And then a newer book, The Great Plant-Based Con, that just came out in 2023. That one has a bit of overlap with The Big Fat Surprise, but then she also goes into a lot of climate change related issues and the religious background of the Seventh-day Adventists and how they're really trying to push a plant-based narrative. It's just really interesting stuff. If you have not read these books yet, please do, because it's like The Matrix. Once you take the red pill and you see it, you can't unsee it. I read them very early on in my carnivore journey, and I'm really glad I did. If you hate reading, or if you just want to listen to this, I have a link in the description that will give you a month of free Audible, and you can just download these books and listen to them. But any way you consume them, do it as soon as possible. Excellent books. All right, let's move into my blood sugar numbers. My most recent numbers: fasting glucose 89, fasting insulin 3.9, A1C 5.5, and fructosamine 222. The typical range that I've seen for my fasting glucose over the past 7 tests has been between 82 and 97, though it's typically in the low 80s. My fasting insulin between 2.7 and 5.5. My A1C between 5.2 and 5.7, normally 5.5, and my fructosamine has been between 155 to 227. I have seen 10 to 20 point decreases in my fasting glucose level since I started carnivore. The year before I started, I got a fasting glucose done and it was a 100. So it wasn't like, pathologically high or even pre-diabetic, but it was starting to inch higher. I do not have an A1C or a fasting insulin from that period of time. Doctors aren't just going to order those for fun, so I don't have anything to compare with from back then. But I do think that everybody should be getting these tests done at least once a year. You can have a normal fasting glucose, but have elevated insulin levels, and that's actually a better indicator of your diabetes risk than just fasting glucose alone. I honestly think blood sugar numbers are what everybody should be concerned about as opposed to LDL cholesterol. Having chronically elevated blood sugar levels is one of the major causes of so many of the issues that we see in the United States and the world today. Type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity, hypertension, high blood pressure, perhaps cancer. That one's not proven, but cancer does feed on sugar, on glucose. So it follows that the higher incidences of cancer that we've been seeing could be influenced by the increase in carb intake over the past 60 years. I've had a continuous glucose monitor on for almost the entire time I've been doing carnivore. I also wore it for 3.5 months before carnivore, so I've been able to see in my glucose data those numbers declining while on carnivore. Carnivore, keto, and low carb can do wonders for lowering your blood glucose levels, and I talk to people every single day who have gone into remission from their type 2 diabetes using this way of eating, or that have a better handle on their type 1 diabetes. The cost for these 4 tests on ownyourlabs.com is $43 total. And if you took out the fructosamine, it would be $29. If your doctor won't order them for you, please do yourself a favor and order them for yourself. Now let's move into inflammation. For my most recent numbers, HSCRP 0.62, homocysteine 7.3, uric acid 4.1, ferritin 107, and vitamin D 59.4. As far as the ranges that I've seen, my HSCRP has been anywhere between 0.32 to 0.78. Homocysteine 6.3 to 7.3, uric acid 3.1 to 4.1, ferritin 98 to 136, and my vitamin D between 46 and 59.4. There's not a single marker that's going to tell you everything you need to know about inflammation, so that's why I test several things. HSCRP is high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and you want to see that below a 1. Anything above a 3 means you're at an increased risk for a cardiovascular event. Since I have been testing mine have always been under a 1. My homocysteine levels have always been very low. Uric acid can be an indicator of kidney health, but it's also an inflammation marker, and my levels have always been good. Ferritin, another great indicator of inflammation, has always been within range. And then finally, we have vitamin D, which I'm also going to talk about a little bit in the vitamins and minerals section, but it's also a great marker for inflammation, because if you have chronic inflammation, it follows that you will most likely have very low vitamin D levels. If your vitamin D is in the single digits or in the teens, it is vitally important that you get that higher as soon as possible. The best way to do this is sunlight, of course, but you can also supplement. There are a lot of opinions out there about what constitutes a good level. The reference range typically is 30 to 100 is normal. Some doctors say 40 to 60 is good. Some say 60 to 80. I personally agree with the 60 to 80 range, so that's what I'm aiming for. I live in the Chicagoland area, and for any of you that have visited in the wintertime, you'll know that it's gray skies, very gloomy, very cold. We don't see the sun for days on end. So I supplement with a D3 and a K2. I do 10,000 IUs of D3, and then I do 100 mcg of K2 every single day. You have to make sure you have that K2 because it helps your body to synthesize the D3. I'll share what I use in the description below. Chronically low vitamin D levels are very dangerous. And when you see people that are hospitalized for any reason, being sick, cancer, whatever it is, you will see across the board that they have low vitamin D levels. Most of the people that died from COVID had chronically low vitamin D levels. So this is just a really simple, really easy thing you can do for your health, supplementing or getting out in the sun, raising those vitamin D levels. Make sure you're getting that vitamin D test at least once a year, and if it's low, make sure you're doing something to get it higher. Overall, my inflammation has been very low on carnivore, and it makes sense because lower blood glucose levels help to lower inflammation levels. There's a ton of misinformation out there about how meat is so inflammatory, and it's just not true. People notice in their first few months on carnivore, their clothes start to fit a little bit looser, their joints aren't hurting anymore, their chronic pain is lessening or completely going away, and those are all indicators of inflammation going down. Before we move on, inflammation markers are not just influenced by diet though, they can also be influenced by stress, sleep, hormones, the time of the year, alcohol intake. There's a lot that goes into it. So if you get some of these markers tested and you see an elevation in one of the numbers, I recommend going back in a month or two and testing it again. It could just be a stressor in your life is causing it to go up a little bit. But if you continue to see some elevations, I would work on getting your blood sugar lower first, and in turn, your inflammation can go down. Let's move into vitamins and minerals. I'm gonna pop all of these up on the screen here. Some of these are freestanding tests like the vitamin D or the vitamin C, and some of them come with the comprehensive metabolic panel like the sodium, potassium, that kind of stuff. I don't test all of these every single time I do a blood test. I'm just doing some here, some there. And some of them are expensive. The selenium is the most expensive one I've done yet. That was $64. Vitamin C is about $50. But I do think it's important to test these things maybe once a year so you can have a better idea as to what deficiencies you have, and then you can supplement to your deficiencies. I don't think people should be taking supplements all willy-nilly. See if you have a deficiency first, and then supplement. Now, I was a complete skeptic before starting carnivore, and I think the number one reason why I didn't start carnivore sooner was because I was concerned that I wasn't going to get all of the vitamins and minerals I needed only eating animal products. And that is not an abnormal assumption. Since the 70s, we have been told through the food pyramid and through all of the marketing out there that you have to eat your fruits and vegetables in order to get all your vitamins and minerals. And yes, of course, fruits and vegetables have some vitamins and minerals in it. I'm not saying that they're devoid of vitamins vitamins and minerals. Nowhere in any of my videos do I want you to get the impression that I think fruits and vegetables are bad, okay? I think you can have a very healthy diet including these things in general. But I do think it's ridiculous that we've been taught for so long that meat is bad when it's like the most nutrient-dense food on the planet. Final thing before we move on to miscellaneous, there is something to be said about reference ranges in general. All of these reference ranges that I'm talking about, like, oh, I'm normal, I'm good, I'm falling within the reference range. All of these reference ranges were determined using people that are eating a standard diet, which is not what we on keto or carnivore are eating. I do think some of our numbers are going to be a bit different from people that are eating a standard diet. But in general, when I've tested these vitamins and minerals, I've fallen within range in all of them. So for me, after my first few vitamin and mineral tests, I stopped being concerned about this. I'm getting everything that I need from the food that I consume. If you feel like you want to do some vitamin and mineral testing, I think you should. I think it's really interesting to see these numbers for yourself. Finally, I want to go into some miscellaneous blood work. Most of this is liver and kidney function numbers. Part of these are part of a comprehensive metabolic panel. But I do want to talk about one of them, fibrinogen. There are a lot of theories out there as to why heart attacks and strokes happen in the first place. And there's been a lot of research on one particular small group of people with a genetic mutation. It's called familial hypercholesterolemia. People with this condition have very, very, very high LDL cholesterol numbers because their bodies aren't able to process it. So the theory is, this is coming from Dr. David Diamond. He thinks that what's causing more heart attacks and strokes in this population with the familial hypercholesterolemia is not the LDL cholesterol elevations, but an increase in fibrinogen. People with higher fibrinogen have stickier blood, and that just means that their blood clots easier, and that can lead to cardiovascular issues. So they looked at groups of people with familial hypercholesterolemia, and they found that despite all of them having high LDL cholesterol, it was only the people that had the high LDL cholesterol plus the elevated fibrinogen levels that were having the heart attacks and strokes and all that stuff and dying early. It's very interesting. I'm going to link a few videos to Dr. Diamond in the description below. These are high-level discussions of journal articles and the available medical literature out there. I really think it's worth a watch. I find it to be very, very interesting. So I wanted to test my fibrinogen levels, and I was able to order it on Own Your Labs, and it came back normal. So that's a plus. Going back to the graphic here, my GGT, that's a liver number. You want that to be really low, -6, that's good. BUN, normal. Creatinine, normal. BUN to creatinine ratio, that's all good. The eGFR, that you want to have above 59. That just means that your kidneys are functioning, and mine is a 115, so it's looking good. And then the rest of the numbers are related to kidney function. Everything is well within range. The total cost of all of this blood work I've had done over the past 7 months is $1,500. And that's all paid for out of pocket. So I'd like to give a special thanks to my channel members. These people help support the testing and data gathering that I do so that I can share these blood work numbers with all of you. If you'd like to take your support a bit further, head over to the description of this video and check out all of the benefits of becoming a channel member. And as always, it's a huge help if you subscribe, if you like this video, and if you share it so that more people can see it and we can get this information spread far and wide. On the screen, I'm going to put a link to my in-depth guide to the carnivore diet. This video is meaty. It's about 53 minutes long, but it's like a reference guide to the carnivore diet, split into chapters so you can get the information you need when you need it. I'm also going to put a link to my 6-month blood work video on the screen. The first 15 minutes of this video is a cholesterol 101, and I think it is worth a watch. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.